something that's great. What is the motivating factor driving partisanship in America today? And I think what causes partisanship, just from our analysis, is tribalism. It's very easy, or it's a universal desire for all human beings to want to feel a part of the tribe, to want to feel welcomed, involved, in being in something larger than them. And tribalism also has the convenience of being easy and convenient. It's much easier to be part of a red tribe or a blue tribe or a green tribe or a yellow tribe or any kind of tribe you would like, because that way, that automatically informs your beliefs. So that way, you have something to go out and do. So it does have that advantage. But tribalism also capitalizes on our instinct for winners and losers, which for society that's based so much on cooperation and helping other people out, tribalism certainly has its shortfalls. And in many cases, the agreement does disguised as cooperation can further this very notion of tribalism. Okay, this mandatory agreement of all people. When our society tells us that we ought to agree or not voice our opinions, that can certainly lead to tribalism, because if you agree with so many people all the time, 24/7, of course you're going to feel the need to defend them. So in some cases it seems like even being disagreeable, okay, the very idea of being disagreeable can help us get past partisanship, and not being disagreeable to the point of being rude, but disagreeing with conventions, standards, and challenging certain ideas and beliefs. And that's why I think, largely, to move past this world of tribalism, I think one solution would be to go back to a individualistic philosophy, just like what it says in the Declaration of Independence. It says life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which seems to imply a individual ethos, right? It doesn't say life, liberty, and the pursuit of group welfare. Okay, certainly does not say that, factually speaking, in the Declaration of the Independence. And prior to the 1920s, with the advent of the philosophy of folks like John Dewey, this individualistic belief, which would cause us to not want to choose sides. If we're individuals, we certainly can't have a red side or a blue side. All that began to change in the early 20th century. And a large part of why that happened was because a fear of uh, corporate growth, of industrialization. The fear was that corporations would grow so big and large, such that individuals would always feel alienated from pursuing meaningful work and pursuing their own happiness. And therefore, we needed the government to intervene against corporations to actually be able to pursue our own individual happiness. And some other people argue along that same line of reasoning that we have to sacrifice our individuality for the greater good. Now, whether or not that's true is also another matter. If we pursue our most profitable outcomes by utilizing our skills, that will actually make things better for all people. But to go back real quick about this idea that corporations should be something to fear and that the government is needed to intervene, kind of seems crazy to think about on one hand, because corporations and business liberated humanity from hunger. So therefore, we have no reason to fear them. Corporations also encourage people to make the best use of their skills so they can actually get paid. And that payment is not a monetary function, but just an indicator of how well they're doing to benefit humanity. Some people still have this mistaken notion that profits are about money. No, profits are about incentivizing you pursuing your own individual conception of happiness and rewarding people who do that well. And also, one thing that we should think about when we talk about needing the government to intervene to make things fair because it's alienating workers is that without the rampant abundance that business and corporations brought, the idea of romance and marrying for love, factually, would not exist because in the state of poverty, you certainly cannot, uh, you can't afford to marry for love. It's often you have to marry on the basis of necessity and need. So, to go from the problem to prosperity, we can go from the problem of partisanship to individualism by following certain things that will obviously allow us to be profitable. One is we can concern ourselves with the things that we can change instead of what we can change. Often, it seems like things like the news only show you things that you can change by design, so that way you're aligned with their tribal goals. We can also take ownership of our own lives by focusing on the skills that we are most incentivized to pursue. And that incentive, that payment is an indicator that we are providing a greater benefit to humanity. And also, the great part about making money, for example, which can lead us from tribal partisanship to individualism, is that once we make money, we don't have to care about the needless things that go on TV. We can be fully satisfied spending our own money comfortably and conveniently. And also, just having families. Families can help us go from partisanship to leading an individualistic lifestyle because then we can focus on the things that we care about the most. We only have time to go ahead and do that. And that's why we're hoping folks like you will join us in going from tribal partisanship to individualism by, for one, signing our petition about telemedicine. Now, hear me out. All fellow thinkers, anybody who has thought about this can agree. Telemedicine is not a partisan matter. In fact, as an independent thinker like yourself, you can certainly realize the value of House Bill 15 and its passage that allow folks like the elderly to pursue their own version of happiness simply by keeping them alive. And you can also take ownership of an issue simply by taking ownership of an issue like healthcare reform, or even tax reform here in the great state of Pennsylvania. You'll come to realize that these issues are not partisan matters. And by focusing on the complex details of these very serious political problems, you won't have the need or time for partisanship. And that's why I wanted to check in with the community. What do you folks think about partisanship? Is the best way to overturn partisanship a return to individualism? Is it to pursue profit? What can we do, in your opinion, aside from signing our telemedicine petition supporting House Bill 15 to encourage to get past tribalism? Go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, honestly, I think you kind of hit it on the head there. Of an attempt to get back to individualism, and more importantly, man, I'd say as much as we can try and localize the solutions. Right? I've personally tried to nail this down to a couple different aspects of. In some sense, obviously, mainstream media is playing a major problem in this because it's just focusing on the squeaky wheel, that 5%, right? And then they're doing it out of pure necessity. I mean, as the old mainstream media tends to atrophy and die off, they have to end up selling headlines that if it bleeds, it leads, right? YouTube is taking over more of the space than they ever have before. I follow a guy on YouTube that gets as many views in a political context as Tucker Carlson does. This is the way that the new paradigm is shifting. So they are losing advertising dollars. As they're losing advertising dollars, they have to sell things that are sensational. And the sensationalism is unsustainable, I believe. But the more we go down this new path, the more sensational they have to get. Zig, I think you're hitting exactly right, man. If we can stop watching mainstream media because it's distracting us, if we can localize solutions and localize conversations more. I think one of the other problems, man, is that a lot of our conversations, if at all, are led just through pure social media. Now, I don't pretend to be a sociologist here, but when I come out and I read some of these statistics indicating that 40 to 50%, sometimes higher, but at least 40 to 50% of human communication is nonverbal. My mannerisms, my cadence of speech, the cues that I'm using, things of this nature. If that statistic is true, I'm interacting with half of another human being on social media. So if my only interactions are with half of another human being, and I rarely interact with that at all anyways, coupled with the problem of mainstream media, if it bleeds, it leads, well, now the only time I'm interacting is with this sensationalized version of what's going on with half of a human being. You know what I'm saying? It's sort of a telescopic evolution of a problem on top of a problem on top of a problem. And the further we get down, the more it constrains, the more it restricts, the more problematic it becomes. And I personally think the only way to be free from that is to localize it again. Exactly what you just said. Trust is going to be the new tradable commodity of the future. You have to have that conversation with the next door neighbor. You have to be able to understand what they're struggling with. You have to vote locally. You have to make these problems, fix it in a local way, and just stop worrying about everything else that's going on. I do think if you can individualize that, man, and get ourselves out of the constraints of the other stuff that's just squeezing the life out of us, squeezing the logic out of us, to be frank too, man. I don't see another way out of it, honestly.
And I like and agree with the point that you make, is that we're largely being dehumanized and then also forced into these sensationalist ways of getting news and communicating, where, for example, things like telemedicine, if people really saw and heard the stories about telemedicine and how it would be absolutely life changing, fundamentally critical to so many people surviving, just by stopping fall risk, just by stopping people from having to be transported from their home. For example, my grandmother had to be transported by ambulance, okay, to get to a doctor. If she could have had telemedicine, it would have made it convenient. And for a number of other folks, even folks who struggle with Alzheimer's and dementia, they're at greater risk of falling. If folks really saw those people and understood those people and heard those people, we would have House Bill 15 signed into law today. If the governor saw them, if the legislator, if people really work together, they would see the true value in that. And I think that's fundamentally imperative. So humanizing is a fundamentally imperative goal to moving past partisanship. I think that's crucial. I was wondering what David's thoughts were on how are we going to get past the various partisan hurdles that are holding us up in passing crucial legislation. I think that's certainly an important thought. Just like I think it's important how you mentioned that this idea of teams is politics truly about being on a team? Why necessarily would you want to be on the team? What benefit is the team going to provide to you? Are folks on this alleged team, or are they going to be the people that are going to help you move your furniture? Are they going to be the people that are the best men in your wedding, or are they going to be the bridegroom in your wedding? Probably not. But the folks who will are folks like us in our community. That's one thing that I'm so proud of about being a part of Americans for Prosperity, is because not only do I know that we are advocating for the right things, we are advocating to work on both sides of the aisle, but I also know that the people who are listening to this, they'll be the same people who will be at my wedding one day. They'll be the same people who will help me move furniture. And they will be the same people who will help me get through the hardest problems I've ever faced in my life. And I think that's one thing that's important. If you're watching out there, go ahead and join us. You know, we'd be happy to have you. You can be a part of a broader AFP family with real friends.
And I would say, Zig, too, man, like you just said, buddy, vulnerability breeding vulnerability, right? It's unfortunately, and I say unfortunately because most people, I think, are unwilling to do this in this sort of tribal times that we're in. You have to drop pride a little bit. And even more unfortunately, like we don't study history anymore. And everything's sort of emotional led. I frankly don't have good context to place in right now. Has it always been this divisive? I mean, have we always been this divided? It seems like we haven't. But frankly, I don't know, man. I would suggest, like, hey, man, go talk to some folks that have been around for a little bit longer. Ask them that question. Ask them, has it always felt this strongly divided? I mean, is there something palpably different? Does it feel different to you? Is it statistically provable? Can we empirically track that it's actually different? Pew Research data says that we can track that we are more partisan now than we have been at least in the last 30 years. Pew Research has been taking the same data since the late 70s, early 80s for 10 questions across this spread, saying like, hey, what's the mean? What's the ideological spread across 10 different questions? In the mid 80s, we're about 3 points different than on into about the last 10, 15 years. It's about a 27 to 28 point spread across. It's an exponential divergence over the last couple of years. So statistically, we can prove that we're more divided than we ever have been before. Does it feel that way to people in the past, though? I mean, did you feel closer to people in the past? I'm only 30-something years old, man. I don't know. I don't know how to reference that properly. And I think one of the other bigger problems here is, as our people are trying to figure out, are we living in 1984 or are we living in a brave new world? Is it censorship of information or is it too much information? As we're trying to figure out which one it is, we just don't study history anymore either. Like, we just have no context how to filter any of this stuff properly. We can't synthesize this through anything properly either. And we're just sort of making it up as we go along. When all this stuff is, that's why I love, Zig, what you keep saying. I think if we just go back to the Federalist Papers a little bit sometimes, a lot of these same conversations have been hashed out a couple hundred years back. Not to say they got it, 100% correct. Let's still have those conversations, but at least have a decent reference point, man. There's no reference point anymore, Well,
and one thing then you mentioned particularly stands out is that folks have no understanding of the history, but also people are getting very, very confused by, I would say, probably too much information, and this information overload likely causes some degree of frustration, which then further causes people to act out in ways that they wouldn't have the need to do. That's why, again, it's so important to partner with us, because we are working on actual issues. We're working on the most important issue of our time here in Pennsylvania, which is undoubtedly telemedicine. Telemedicine will create greater access to healthcare. It'll be, instead of these special programs providing healthcare for all, we can do it right here by just removing restrictions, by signing telemedicine into law today. That's why we need your support, and we're going to continue to have these conversations. But I just wanted to kick it over to some of the other folks in our conversation here today. Dr. Ted Davian, hear about, what are some of your thoughts about partisanship, and what do you think what we could do to help get past this?
It all depends upon the region you live in. Mm-hmm. It depends upon local society. I agree with what was said already. Mm-hmm. If you belong to a fraternal group, that helps. If you belong to a religious group, that helps. Mm-hmm. Because you're not alone. Mm. AFP provides that service. Mm-hmm. It's not only to its own members, but it's to external members, such as legislators. We need to band together. We need to have uniformity. We have to fight prejudice. And we have to maintain our American basic freedoms that the Revolutionary War was fought over. If we can do that, maintain our freedom, we have a better chance of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Excuse me, Mr. Levin. But it's worth bringing up.
Mhm.
Uniformity, to some degree, is better than sole independence.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, you're 1000% right about that. And the one point that you brought up that I didn't think about is really how alone people are feeling. I think it actually might be loneliness that caused people to act out in partisan ways. If you're part of some larger community, there would be no reason to get attention because you're already part of something meaningful, right?
At the risk of being prejudicial, I joined the Boy Scouts 83 years ago. It had fundamental principles. It had a great oath. It had a great law. Somehow we lost that. It became too commercial. If it had maintained what its founder, Baden-Powell, had done, the world would still be a better place because it's an international organization.
Mhm.
Again, similar to AFP. They may have a different name, but nonetheless, the principles are the same. Freedom, justice for all, etc.
Yeah. Yeah, and I certainly agree. It certainly sounds like it is very difficult to have freedom without discipline or rights without responsibility. I,
Exactly.
I know my good friends down there in Tennessee have really reiterated that point, and that's really why we are advocating at Americans for Prosperity for folks to join us, because we know that we can help you take on the responsibilities you need, and we'll guide you. We'll be there every step of the way to understand things, how things actually work, without having to be upset in a partisan way. I know we can do it. I've seen it with activists like you, and also Tom, and that's why I just want to kick it over to Tom for a minute. You have any thoughts about what you think then that we could do to help get past partisanship here in the Keystone State, or perhaps even nationwide?
Basically, I'd say the best way you're going to achieve bipartisanship is by two things. One, you're going to have term limits, because I think the politicians that we have in Harrisburg get too comfortable in their seats, and they feel that they can do whatever they want. As it comes to like what laws they support, what laws they're against, and also the special interest groups that come to Harrisburg to propose these laws that support corporate welfare, laws like that stopped the telemedicine bill that was down in Harrisburg. Those are two of the best. Those, I think, in order to get at the Capitol, that's what you're going to have to do, is term limits and not having so many special interest groups influence the politicians down in Harrisburg.
And the main thing that I think is really important about what you said is certain special interest groups. We've talked a lot about the Pennsylvania budget here, and the Pennsylvania budget, which we'll be continuing to talk about until that time. But then, and that budget is rife with handouts for certain special interest groups. I think we pay at least $7 million for folks, presumably like Brad Pitt and other folks from Hollywood, to sip lattes in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. And I'm sure they're great lattes. I'm sure they're some of the best that there ever was. But I don't know if we need to pay $70 million in a tax credit for these people, these nice people. I'm sure they're also very kind, exceptionally generous to have lattes. So we certainly agree with that. And before I go, I think we're going to kick it over shortly to our legislative updates and talk about what's going on, other events in our community real quick. But before I go, I just wanted to hear from our friends from Tennessee real quick. Are there any last parting thoughts, either David or Grant, that you guys have before we?
I'll jump in one more time. I love talking about the flip side of the coin from rights and responsibilities, because it's like you have the right to have a responsibility for your community, where in ancient times that was some duke or earl or somebody else had the right to be responsible for your community. But in America, we have this thing where everyone is responsible, and we have the right to be, which we did not have. And it's so weird where people think about that responsibility as some kind of burden. Yeah, burden is a great example. Or yeah, like it's this awful thing to have a responsibility to make your community better. But it's this in the course of human history, it's novel. It's novel for you personally to have responsibility, whether the community does better or goes into decline. That's novel. And I think it's really great, and it's something we should celebrate instead of there's so many things you hear out in the world where that idea of where like you have responsibility and the right to make your community better is looked at as some kind of burden, when it's really one of the most beautiful things we have. Because for so long, regular people who lived out in the world trying to just have kids and not starve to death for thousands of years, they were told that what they thought didn't matter and what they did didn't matter and who they were would always be forgotten. But like, you have a chance to leave the world better than you found it, better than any human being has ever lived. You know, and I thought of that when the doctor was talking about the Boy Scouts. That whole, it's a beautiful thing, that responsibility part, and it's tied in with the rights. The rights don't mean anything if you don't use them to do good stuff. You know, you might as well go back to having kings back like they used to if you're not going to use those rights to make the world a better place, you know?
Yeah, and there's a psychological component, strong one, right? There's something cathartic about enacting positive change on your community. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get too corporate with the speaker, man, but I really do think that time for the Frederick Douglass quote of uniting with anyone to do right, no one to do wrong, that phraseology is coming into its own again, right? I mean, that's where people are, at least psychologically. That's what they yearn for. That's what they want. Everybody wants resolution right now, especially right now in the midst of this chaos. Honestly, man, I'll tell you, what brought me to AFP was David and I were actually doing talk radio prior to this, man. And it just seemed like every single story I was reading, it didn't matter. Like, I was developing political nihilism almost. Seriously. It just didn't matter if it was blue, red, left, right, Democrat, Republican. It was the same deal for me. And I needed a way to cut through that nonsensical minutia and just do something finally, like boots on the ground, actually enact change, feel decent instead of just spewing dogma on a microphone all day long, right? And so it's honestly, that's what brought me over to EFP, because I was just fed up with it. And the first couple of times where I was able to do something, gather some people together, enact change, at least just get some even marginal win, man. What that does for your soul, it's I won't speak too highly of it, but it's slightly indescribable, at least, right? I think it's real stuff, man.
Yeah, no, and I 1000% agree with that. Really, what gets me involved and motivated and ready to do things for my community is the fact that when I was younger, I was raised in a household with my grandfather who still worked and his paralyzed wife. Okay, and I don't have any way to pay back what they had actually done for me at that point in time. The only thing that I can do is do everything I can to get folks who are listening today involved with what we're doing now. Sign our telemedicine pledge. I guarantee you that'll help folks like your grandparents. It'll help everyone in the state of Pennsylvania, because there's no reason why it shouldn't be signed into law. But that's all I can do. Okay, the only thing that I can do is to pay back what my grandfather gave me, which was also my first name and his middle name, is to get involved in our community. I'm so thankful that Americans for Prosperity and all the great folks on this call have allowed me to help them in that goal, so I can feel like I'm doing the right thing. So 1000% grateful for the folks listening, all the great folks who participated in this conversation. I'm just going to go to our legislative update. So Senate Bill 637 recently moved out of committee. And speaking of folks who want a second chance, Senate Bill 637 will, in fact, do exactly that. It'll guarantee that folks who have committed a crime in the past will not always be prohibited from working in an occupation that requires a license. It'll give those folks a second chance at meaningful employment right here in the state of Pennsylvania, right now, here today. If you commit a crime, you can be stopped from getting a license, even if your crime has nothing to do with that license. That's got to end, and we need your help and support for advocating for that as well. So Senate Bill 637, that's going to give so many folks in the state of Pennsylvania a second chance. And the House Bill 2025, we've been working on this for a long time, about the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which has a number of problems, but perhaps the biggest is what this bill addresses, in that our governor has unilaterally entered us into a regional plan that these regional planners determine our energy prices through a cap and tax. And so the real heart of the issue, though, is a constitutional one, and this would grant the legislator the authority to determine whether or not we want to enter into RGGI. So for folks who care about liberty out there, again, encourage you to reach out to your lawmaker about that. And that's our legislative update. On to our community events. So Tuesday, tomorrow, we will be holding an event about policing reform right here in Pennsylvania. Some bills just ran. Today, I believe this will help you get a better perspective of what we are doing about policing reform, our perspective, the policies. We're going to get you fully caught up to that 100% on Tuesday. And Thursday, we'll be engaging activists, story from the grassroots. We're going to hear from more people in the grassroots about how telemedicine would benefit either them or their family members, because everybody has a different meaningful take on how telemedicine could benefit them. And also it's a great opportunity for the activists and folks like you that are listening to get some public speaking experience, learn to feel more comfortable in front of all the great people that are a part of our network. So again, engaging activists Thursday at 7 p.m. And that's all I have. That concludes Americans for Prosperity community conversations with you, talking about the things that matter. And I hope you all have a great night. Thank you.
One last thing, if I may. There is a solution to all these problems. Read the Constitution of the United States. That will help. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Davi. All right, great. Been an awesome chat. I want 1,000